So my name's Lucy Mead and I'm a researcher at the University of Edinburgh. I've just completed my master's degree in marine systems and policies, and today I'm here at MAST to talk about my master's dissertation research. Blue sharks are a pelagic apex predator. They're a species of shark that are present all over the world, in all of the world's major oceans, but also around much of the UK, which I guess a lot of British people aren't aware of. The reason that you may have heard about them is that they're the main target in the finning industry, which is of course quite prevalent in the media, but they're also a huge target in pelagic, as bycatch in pelagic longlining as well. So blue sharks are actually a relatively well-studied species of shark compared to other species of sharks. However, our understanding of kind of their distribution, their migration patterns and their complex life history is still basically very limited, and this applies to not only the North Atlantic but to all the oceans in which they're present. What we do know in terms of North Atlantic distribution is that they undergo this annual clockwise migration pattern, quite generally, that's generally speaking. So in the UK we find mainly females and juvenile sharks over the summer months. They usually have arrived there from either the southern North Atlantic or from the coast of America, and they might migrate across to the UK. Where they go after that is what the subject of my study was, and different studies have found different things, so that's where the picture is quite incomplete. So for my research I was using a database which is owned by SASACN, that's the Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network. And this database was a tag and recapture angler-led database. So that means that recreational sea anglers around the UK have been tagging these sharks with non-electronic ID tags, re-releasing the sharks back into the sea. And then in theory, when the same shark is re-caught by either a recreational or a commercial fisherman anywhere in the North Atlantic, they collect the information and send it back to SASACN in Scotland. So I was using this tag and recapture data, which gives us the location of the tag and recapture, but also things like length and sex of the shark. I looked both at environmental preferences by different parts of the population and also at fishing pressure. And my main conclusion really was that the juveniles are facing threats from both overfishing because they're consistently present in the Azores where fishing pressure is high, but that they're also potentially more vulnerable to the environmental change associated with climate change. And this is because they have a particularly narrow temperature preference, but also because their distribution is quite strongly linked to environmental variables. So my findings kind of suggest that the juvenile population might be particularly vulnerable, and this could have implications for the wider population. It may not be as stable and resilient as has previously been assumed. The hope from these findings in terms of wider implications and implications for protection and management is that we need to target where the juveniles tend to spend their time, because we need to target protection on the juveniles, which, as I've said, are perhaps particularly vulnerable. Because most of the juveniles were found around the Azores, and this is consistent with previous findings from other studies as well, I suggest that protection should be targeted around the Azores, and at the moment MPAs and other marine policy instruments are quite fragmented in that area. However, also the high seas are really important areas to protect for blue sharks because they're used obviously as transitory habitat on these huge migrations that the blue sharks undertake. The thing that we still really need to understand about the blue sharks is just more detail, because we have kind of an overall general picture but not much detail yet. So particularly concerning environmental preference, we need to understand in more detail the different environmental preferences of different parts of the population, and especially the most vulnerable parts of the population, so we can kind of more robustly predict how and where climate change is going to affect these parts of the population. But of course, also the picture in terms of general distribution and migratory patterns is still incomplete, as you say. And so basically we need to continue carrying out tagging studies, whether this be satellite tagging or tag recapture, but increasingly probably will be satellite tagging because this is a fisheries independent method, so it avoids the pitfalls of fishery dependent methods.